طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داع.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is known as the most influential man to have ever walked on this earth. And yet, many people have written volumes against him. There have been programs, films, cartoons, even film trailers made about our Prophet, deriding him, denigrating him, and of course calling him all sorts of names. And yet, he is followed by 1 billion people across the world, loved by billions, meticulously emulated by the same people across this globe. What is it that makes people so much fond of this one individual character in history? What is it that makes people across the globe want to follow every footstep of the Prophet? Of course, it lies in one single answer. Our faith in Allah is determined, and our manifestation of faith and practice can only be when we follow the Prophet of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what do we learn from the seerah? That's the first question. Why do we need to learn from the seerah? Well, seerah is actually the only authentic proof we have of the revelation, the message. If it wasn't for the life of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how can we corroborate the authenticity or validity of the revelation? Seerah puts into perspective Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a prophet, but also as an ordinary human being, not too far away from us, reachable. He's not untouchable. We can follow him. He was a human being, not a superhuman, just an ordinary one like you and me, chosen by Allah to be his messenger, of course. Seerah also puts into perspective how we find our way to Allah Azza wa Jal. It is Prophet's life, his actions, his sayings, his approvals, put in the most authenticated form possible. And that's what we call seerah. So if we leave the life of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam out, we will fail to understand the Quran. If we leave the life of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam out, we will fail to understand how to worship Allah. In fact, we will not be able to understand how to reach Allah Azza wa Jal, and that's the reason why we need to understand seerah properly. How do we understand seerah in the context in which we live? We live in Britain today, in the 21st century world. How do we understand seerah for this particular time, in this particular country, in this particular environment? Is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam relevant to our society here in the UK or the West at large? Or is he actually relevant? When you study his life, it actually puts that into perspective. You suddenly realize Prophet's life contained universal values, values that can transcend beyond a geographic limitation or a landmass. You can go anywhere. You can be living in Timbuktu and be following Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I could be living in London and following Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and would turn out to be the same. Be living in the same, following the same ideals, and observing those universal principles. That's why in the 21st century world, understanding the Prophet is more important than it has ever been. So, inshallah, I will discuss the life of the Prophet in various segments. First is the context in which Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam came. He came in Arabia, in a city called Mecca, to a group of people called Quraysh, or in that family. He is of course the universal prophet, prophet for the whole universe, but his context is very important. He came at a time, and it was historically known as the year of the elephant. The king of Yemen, Abraha, had attacked the Kaaba, or intended to attack the Kaaba, because he was jealous of its fame and focus. He wanted the world to divert all their attention from Mecca, the Kaaba itself, to a house that he built, but nobody paid any attention to his adventure. So he decided to lead an army of elephants to come and destroy the house of God, Kaaba. And historians have written, Abdul Muttalib, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's grandfather, was alive at that time, and he was the custodian of the Kaaba, as it is traditional that the family of Quraysh would always be the custodians of the Kaaba. Abdul Muttalib being the eldest in his whole tribe and Arabian society, everyone respected his authority, everyone respected his stature, his words and wisdom. Abraha came with the elephants and his troops, and en route he decided to steal, or shall we say confiscate, Abdul Muttalib's animals, his camels and his goats. He thought, if I do that, I will actually cause a reaction. Abdul Muttalib simply went to Abraha and said, please, can you give me my animals back? Abraha was rather surprised. We have come to destroy a sacred house that you value so close to your heart, and you have come to ask for your animals? Do you have no regard for your house, or the house that you consider to be so sacred, house of God? What kind of a man are you? This house can't be that important. These were the laments of Abraham. And Abdul Muttalib, in return, he said, look, mister, in our own language, of course, if somebody came to attack your house, you would come to protect it. You have come to attack house of God, but en route you have nicked, stolen my animals. I am the protectors of my animals. Please give me my animals back. And the owner of the house, that is house of God, God himself will look after his house. I don't have to do anything. Abdul Muttalib returned to his people who had left Mecca and took shelter in the neighboring mountains. Abraham marched forward with his elephants, and they all attacked, of course. En route, Allah Azza wa Jal very clearly and vividly describes this in the Quran in Surah Al-Fil, where he says, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. Did you not see how we dealt with people of elephants? Allah Azza wa Jal sent birds with baked clayed stones in their beaks and in their claws that they dropped on top of the elephants and the troops, and all perished. A few that escaped fled for their life and went back to report that such a calamity they have never seen or have never heard. Thus Allah protected his own house from the attack from the outside. Remember what Abdul Muttalib said? If somebody comes to attack my house, I'll protect it. Abraha, you have come to attack Allah's house, Allah will protect it. And Allah did. It is in that particular family of Quraysh Prophet of Allah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born. It is significant that he is born in a family that has the tenacity, that has the depth, faith and character to bring up, as well as nurture the future prophet, the final prophet of God on this earth. And that's the reason why I narrate the story of Abraha and Abdul Muttalib to you, to give you the context. Prophet came when his house was being attacked. When I say his, I mean Allah's house was being attacked. But Allah protected it. Prophet came in a family that was known as the most noble of the families in that society. Though family nobility doesn't create hierarchy within Muslims and Islam, of course. But it's important to notice that even in today's society, aristocracy plays a huge role. Sophistication, morals and mannerism, education, stature, status in society, all are embedded in good family. And Allah chose the best of families in the world at that time, the Quraysh, where Prophet was born. So significance of Prophet's birth in that particular year is Allah showed the world, especially the Meccans, don't mess around with Allah's house. If you do, Allah knows how to take care of it. Well, I'm going to stop here now. When we come back after the break, we'll inshallah continue. But I want to talk about Prophet ﷺ's birth a bit more, about the context and the society in which he came, and how that relates to our time, where we live today, 21st century world, modern, advanced, and the West. So inshallah we'll continue straight after the break, so don't go too far away. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داع.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're continuing talking about the life of the Prophet. So Prophet ﷺ was born in a family called Quraysh, in a noble family of course. His grandfather was the leader of the Quraysh society. Thus Allah is establishing Prophet in that society before he could even be a Prophet. It's important. Prophet was born at a time when society's morality, standard, society's ethics, belief, systems were all corrupt. The might was right. Woman had no right at his time. Misogyny was the norm. Egotistic lifestyle was the norm of the leaders. Whoever was rich had access to everything. There were no societal contract, there were no social contract, there were no morality and ethics that would bind universally all people. Rasulullah was born at a time when Arabs would bury their daughters alive. Harrowing stories we hear from some of the companions who confessed later on of being party to that barbaric practice. In that process, while telling the story, weeping bitterly, remorsefully, regretfully, saying how barbaric we were. That's why that particular period of human history is known as Ayam Jahiliyyah, time of the darkness. The depth of darkness was so deep. It was so deep that people did not even know that they were ignorant. They thought they were the most sophisticated people on the face of this earth. And that's the tragedy. Orphans were trampled upon, widows were taken advantage of, human beings were enslaved, beaten to death for smallest dissent. Society was in turmoil, both physically as well as spiritually. They believed in many gods, but there were no spiritual connection to God whatsoever. It was all material. Even gods you could buy and sell. The more you give to a god, the more likely that god is yours. So there were claims to God. It's that kind of time Prophet came. Alcoholism was rife. People used to drink too much. They used to gamble too much. Intoxicant was the norm of the day. People would spend all their times in amusement, just looking for cheap, short thrills and momentary pleasures. Prophet came to change that. But his challenge was not small. He came at a time when society needed a desperate reformation, transformation into something better. Now let's transpose that particular model to the time in which we live today. 21st century modern world, technologically advanced and yet morally bankrupt. We are 21st century people morally in dire state. Families are breaking down like no tomorrow. Children are not finding love in their homes. They're being brought up by parents who don't love them. People are killing their children. At the time of the Prophet, they used to bury their daughters alive. In our 21st century world, people are burying their sons and daughters alive. No compassion, greed is normal. We don't have to go very far to see how greed has destroyed the economy of 21st century world in the West today. Bankers, people who work in the financial institutes, they robbed us, left you and I with pennies, squandered our wealth. At the time of the Prophet, the might was right, yes. Today we live at a time where the superpowers are right because they can bomb and they can flex their muscles any way they like. Or people live under dictatorship and tyranny. What's the difference? The challenge is still the same. In fact, challenges become bigger today. Family values didn't exist at the time of Rasulullah. If you wanted to get married, the custom of marriage were very strange. A woman would put out a flag in front of her own house, telling men that she was available. Many men would interact with her, and if she would conceive a child, the woman would call all the men that she had been with, and she would select out of one of them randomly as the father of the child. How bizarre! And yet, today, how is it different? Sexual immorality is equally, if not worse. Sleeping around with people with no relationship, having sexual intercourse with any stranger randomly. It's very normal within our society today. Morality, if it was more substantial in 21st century, then perhaps I would say the challenge would be less. But morality has degraded beyond belief. If Ayyam Jahiliyyah was a time when we should be looking for a change and Prophet was sent to change a people who were at the depth of darkness, today we're at the depth of darkness even though we are technologically advanced. We're literate, we're able to read, write and invent everything that you can think of. Man have reached all the way to the moon and going to Mars. Everything is possible. And yet we have seen in our society moral bankruptcy in every way possible. Spiritual bankruptcy. God doesn't exist in 21st century world. Just like the time of the Prophet. Some Quraysh believed in the existence of God, of course. But substantially, their belief in God was based around the idols that they would make by themselves with their own hands, and they would sell them, they would buy them. Patronage could be bought by God or from God by giving more donations. Some people even believe that today. Some Muslims donate thinking they can buy patronage from God by donating bigger amounts, even though they would pursue a lifestyle that is completely vile, completely unethical, earning haram, prohibited of course, living a life that is unethical, immoral, but they want to donate bigger chunks of their wealth because they think somehow they can bypass what is needed in life. That transformation is needed, of course, but they think they can bypass that by buying favors. You can't. I'm sorry, you can't. So society hasn't changed substantially. If anything, challenges have become deeper and we need to do something more about it. So morally we're bankrupt. Socially we are destroyed from within. In fact, we are sleepwalking into self-destruction. Economically, our wealth has been looted by a small few. Did you know millions and millions of people across the globe, in fact 890 million people around the globe are hungry. And yet you and I spend more than £7 billion worth of food, throw them in the dustbin every year. Wastage, excess, inequality, racism, prejudice are still available in our society. And it was at the time of the Prophet Muhammad faced the same. Black people had no right, poor people had no right, orphans had no right, widows had no right, women had no right. And it is through that message and the mission Prophet pursued that he was able to transform that society from the depth of darkness, and he created within them the light that not only illuminated them, but it flooded the whole universe with the message of Islam. And that's the reason why understanding the context of where Prophet came is very important. He came in Arabia to a people who were morally bankrupt. We as Muslims live in 21st century world in the West, where moral bankruptcy is on the rise. Challenge is similar. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, came to a society that socially had no ethics, no standard. We live at a time in 21st century West, of course, where social infrastructure, family, all these values have completely been destroyed. Are not only destroyed, but anyone who upholds them are sidelined and rejected. Prophet came to a society where economy was in the pockets of a small band of people. We still have the same in 21st century world. We have to understand the life of the Prophet so that we can understand how to bring about that change. This is just an introduction to the life of the Prophet. We, through our discussions inshallah, will look at different aspects of his life to see how he was able to bring about that change. Next episode inshallah we'll be talking about the beginning of revelation, how that transformed not only his environment but the whole entire landscape. Inshallah, until next time, take care. Assalamu alaikum.
طلع البدر علينا من ثني